The client could say, yeah, I'm worried. I'm worried that like this is going to ruin your day or this is going to be upsetting for you. And then I can talk about like how I take care of myself and how I process difficult emotions. I don't want to be the focus of it, but I want to relieve the client that like, hey, you're not hurting me by showing these negative feelings. Like I'm welcoming your grief right now, even if it brings tears to my eyes.
Hello and welcome. We're so glad you're tuning into the Taking Good Care show. I'm Dr. Andrew Wong, based in Toronto, Canada.
And I'm Dr. David St. Arnaud, based in Edmonton, Canada. We're two practicing psychologists with over a decade of experience each, working in a variety of settings and supporting diverse populations.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. While we're both practicing psychologists, our podcast is intended purely for educational and entertainment purposes. It's not a substitute for professional mental health care or treatment. If you're in need of support, we strongly encourage you to reach out to a licensed mental health professional in your area.
All right.
All right, good evening, Dave. It's part 2 of our marathon recording on a late night.
Yeah. And then we are going to be going into some risky territory. So either we're getting really tired or more brave, I think, in terms of our podcasting. So we'll see where this goes.
I'm telling you, it's the moonlight. It's the summer heat and the moonlight here in Toronto.
Well, and I also think like we're probably laughing more than we normally do, but we're under no substances. No, I've had a coffee and now I'm having a water. So
I have a caffeine-free tea. Is this still light in the background in Edmonton right now?
no, we're
Okay.
approaching 10 p.m. So
Hey, I remember like some of those summer nights, 9:45,
yeah.
like still nice and bright. All right, so risky territory, being triggered by clients. And as we were talking about different topics to share with listeners, I think this one came up, and I think it probably happens more often than not because everybody is so different and unique in terms of our values and our foundations, our histories, that we all bring something to the table, and not everybody is always compatible with each other. But I think we're sort of in this unique position as psychologists and therapists that we hear things from clients all the time and they feel safe with us to share. And I don't qualify it as oversharing, but I think that because they feel so comfortable, they may tell us things that on the inside we might be like, whoa, right? Or even triggered not because of something they said that's part of their value system, but as we discussed, off the air, I remember being in the PhD years and mentoring some sort of junior grad students, and they asked, Andrew, like that person just talked about sexual abuse with you. Like, how do you not have some sort of visceral reaction? And it's just always remembering to keep myself as grounded as possible. Because if you make a certain facial expression, if you make a certain behavioral reaction, the client will see it.
Yeah, I think you brought this up as a possible topic and we were talking like this doesn't really get talked about a lot.
Mm.
And it's risky because it is kind of a topic that isn't discussed and we're gonna put ourselves out there. Like I don't really know how you deal with this, what your experiences are. Like I'm flying blind right now and I'll share some of my own experiences. But like you said, I think this happens quite regularly and there isn't a lot of guidance, especially from like the training programs that we went through.
No, I don't think there's a designated course that talks about what do you do if you are triggered by a client because of what they said or what they shared. If you have a good supervisor who you trust, then it's great as a grad student or as a early career psychologist to say, hey, like this was shared. What do you think? And then that's where some of the training can come with respect to, how do you react to this? What do you say? Can you still work with this client?
Yeah.
Right? Because of what they said, someone to guide you along that process. And sometimes supervision can seem like therapy because of that, right? But it helps you think about what decision are you going to make as a psychologist and, an ethical decision.
Yeah, and this isn't what we're going to be talking about, but in terms of supervision and supervising provisional psychologists, psychologists need 1,600 hours of supervised practice, and that doesn't include a lot of their practicums and other experience that they get in their education. So that can be a good place for it, but it's also, like you said, it can turn into therapy. And at least the supervision training that I've had, you want to steer clear of that. You don't want to be
Hmm.
providing therapy to your supervisee. So, you know, at minimum, I think the what I took away was that either talk to your supervisor or go to therapy, right? Like
Yep.
if
Yep.
you're triggered by something and it's related to your own trauma or your own background, then do your own work, do your therapy. But aside from that, in terms of like in the room, what do you do, right?
Yep.
How do you manage that experience with another human being who's possibly sharing something that they haven't shared with anyone else?
So I think for me, my process, especially in the therapy setting, is always trying to be very, very grounded. And what I mean by that is, the active listening piece, what is the client sharing here? How did we get to this point of the conversation, of the therapy session? And can I respect where the person's coming from, given what I know about them? Right. So if they were, for example, if they've shared with me in the past that they were raised a certain way, they surround themselves, with close friends and perhaps good friends of, with certain values and foundations, is that okay? Does it make them somebody who I can continue working with? It doesn't necessarily make them a quote unquote bad person. It's just that we may have different values, but can I see it from their perspective? Right. So I'm always trying to do perspective taking in a session as well, as they're sharing with me certain views, perhaps their political views. It can be a young person or a teenager who's talking about masculinity. We had that episode on masculinity and gender differences. How do they see women? With younger individuals, I also wonder, is it my role to help them see the other perspective? Right. So as I'm trying to see it from their perspective, is it also my role, especially for 9, 10 to 17-year olds, to help them see it from the other side? Can I help mold them if they're open to it?
Yeah, like when do you address a behavior? There's a phrase that sticks with me, like call people in, don't call people out, right? Like
Hmm.
around
Hmm.
racism and stuff like that. So quite often, if someone feels like you're calling them out, then, it kind of goes sideways and it
Yep.
becomes like a power struggle or a back and forth. And so how do we meet people with compassion and like you said, like that, seeing them as a good person, but you might not agree with everything that they believe, their ideas or their values. So I actually was in a my one of my supervisors when I was doing my master's was giving a presentation to teachers, and she basically said, if you can't find one thing that you like about each child, like it is going to be hard to work with that child that you can't find one thing. So, I'm looking for things that I like about my clients. I'm looking for the goodness in them.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yep.
that can help me kind of deal with or manage kind of like when they say something that I'm like, ooh, I don't really agree with that, or I don't really
Yeah.
believe that. But hold on, there's a bigger relationship here that I don't want to lose focus of.
I think you took the word right out of my mouth, the goodness in people. Right. And I think being in this profession, especially working with clients, is so important right off the hop as you're listening to their stories, as I'm working with that child, to see the goodness. And with a lot of children, I try to find that innocence and to understand that sometimes they will say things and maybe, might be a little bit offensive, but the innocence of children, where did they get that? Right? Is this something they heard in the schoolyard? Right? And do I blame them for it? No. There can't be any blame. But I also see the possibility of molding that though, right? Again, it's like, oh, you just said that. Oh, where did you hear that from before? What do you think that means? Right? And if you say that to somebody, how do you think they might feel?
Yeah. Well, and you know what? Sometimes maybe not so much with kids, but more with adults, it can be a test, right? Like, are you
Hmm.
just gonna reject me? Are you gonna just like if I say this, how like it's like how are you gonna respond when I say something
Yes.
like this? Can you handle that? If they're already expecting that they're gonna be rejected, or they're already expecting that they're not gonna be accepted for who they are.
And those are sometimes the clients who may present the most hostile at the beginning.
Hmm.
But I will say the majority of the time, people soften up as you show acceptance. And again, going back to being grounded, like, okay, let's hear them out, right? Hear them out. You barely know them. This is your first meeting with them. Let's see where they go with this train of thought, right? And if we don't react, right, we don't show any kind of disgust, worry, anxiety, and we stay nice and calm as therapists, I have always found that the other person softens. Right? I don't know if that's your experience, Dave.
I'm not sure. But I do know that it doesn't stay like it can change, right? And
Yeah.
I sometimes think, there are clients that come in and it takes years before they share the worst part of themselves or the thing that they're most ashamed of or embarrassed of. But there are others that that's the first thing they share. And that's the test, right? Like, can you handle this? This happened to me when I was 5, right? And they're looking at my face, they're looking at my body language, going like, are you the person that can actually handle this, or do I need to find someone else?
Yep. And I've supervised others who have gone through the same situation. And sometimes I'll get a text and say, Andrew, can you talk right now? I just had this client. Can you talk? And it's the first time they saw that person and they throw out examples of stuff in their lives that are very dramatic, very concerning.
Hmm.
And sometimes when you say, "Oh, you know what? I think we need to watch out for the safety of your children, or of you," and you talk about like the limits of confidentiality. Oh, if you say you're going to harm yourself, I do need to call, someone to make sure they're safe or call 911. That's our duty to report, right? We do get people who will be like, "Oh, no, actually, I'm okay. Like, don't need to do that, but I'm okay." Right? I'll be okay. It's like, are you sure? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm actually not going to do anything. And then it's like, okay, was that a sort of testing of our limits here? Right?
Hmm.
Were they sort of testing our boundaries and our limits to be their therapist?
Actually, as you were saying that, I was remembering a time where it was like some agency and it was drop in and it was like someone that I had no rapport with, no relationship with. And it was about self injury. And we talked a bit about it. And then they just rolled up their sleeves and showed me
Mm.
all the fresh scars that were on their forearms. And I hadn't seen something like that before.
Hmm.
So, for myself, it's been a bit of a process. It has been, my own therapy and my own training and working on like what are the things that bother me, that upset me, that trigger me, and then how do I stay grounded? How do I stay in my window of tolerance where I'm able to kind of feel and notice what I'm thinking and feeling, and then also be able to feel or get a sense of or empathize with what the other person is thinking and feeling, and being able to stay in that zone? Because if I go outside of that, generally nothing good is going to happen for them, and nothing good, like if they go outside of that window of tolerance, nothing good is going to come from therapy for them. So
Yes.
and we co-regulate, and we haven't talked about this, but like we can feed off each other's emotional regulation. And so if I get dysregulated, it can dysregulate them, right? Or if they come in dysregulated, there's a chance that I get dysregulated. What does that actually look like? And how do we, you know, work with that?
Yeah. And oftentimes, I think working with kids, this is where we talk about that co-regulation. Um, when children are getting dysregulated and parents are getting triggered by it and they start getting dysregulated, right? You sort of talk about this volcano that explodes, right? Where, look, the same thing can happen in the therapy session. And I think for me, that's what I'm always telling myself to your example about people who are cutting. When I have clients, teenagers, adults who disclose that they're cutting, I think for me, it's almost a bit of a natural response to just be like, okay, stay grounded, stay calm, right?
Hmm.
And listen to the person who's in front of you, what are the marks about? What is the cutting about?
Hmm.
What help do you need right now?
Yeah.
Right? It almost actually triggers me to be calmer than I normally will be in a session.
Hmm.
Right. So I can use humor and, I can get excited in a session, but in those moments, it's like, let's downshift even more. Right. So if I'm on gear 3 right now, let's downshift to gear 1 because that's what the person in front of me needs right now.
There's different ways to emotionally regulate and ground yourself. And you keep saying stay grounded. Like for me, I take a breath, right?
Yep.
And I visualize like literally that oxygen going to the parts of my brain that I want to stay online,
Yep.
right? And I'm just like, okay, I'm okay. They're okay. Here we go.
Yes.
Let's see where this is going. And just like I said, one person can be dysregulated and dysregulate the other person. The opposite is also true. So if I can stay calm and regulated, I'll sometimes even say this to clients, like borrow my nervous system, right? Like just
Hmm.
notice. And then you can watch their nervous system settle, right? And it's really cool.
Yeah. That's cool. I'm going to take that, borrow my nervous system.
Hmm.
I really like that. Yeah. So oftentimes, like, it will be after the session, usually when I will take that deep breath.
Oh, okay.
Right. So in the moment, like I'm working, I'm hopefully helping, I'm trying to help the person process. What do I need to do to keep this person safe? Are they okay to leave my office at the end of the appointment? Do I need to spend more time? And usually it's not until afterwards when everything is sort of resolved for the moment
Hmm.
and the client has left the office, then I'll take that deep breath. And it's like, oh.
What comes after that breath?
What comes after that breath? I think it's just like, okay, you know what? I just need a few minutes. Like if I have a back-to-back appointment, I just need a few minutes. If it's the last appointment of the day, I've got a couch in my office. I will just lay there for a few minutes and, just realize, man, that was tiring.
Hmm.
Like I'm tired,
Yeah.
right? And acknowledge that that took a lot of energy.
Yeah, I still like I love riding my bike home at the end of the day, and that can be just a release. I'll do the same thing. I'll lay on my couch and throw on like the Calm app and do like a 10-minute or 5-minute meditation that allows me to reconnect with my body and reconnect with myself and just yeah. So but also working with clients that I can anticipate. I can look at my caseload. I can look at
Mhm.
my day and go like, all right, I can get ready. I can get prepared for
Mhm.
a challenging session where I possibly am going to be working harder emotionally.
Yep.
Um, yeah, so that matters. And then, you know, when it comes to people saying things that don't go,
Hmm.
might go contrary to some of our own beliefs. Oh, that one, that's different. That's different than being like emotionally triggered with trauma.
Yes. Yes. Yep. So I think some examples there for our listeners, coming from my own practice. One will be parents calling, and asking, or giving examples. My son plays with dolls, likes to get dressed up in skirts. Can you change that? Right. So, whenever I hear that, I don't take them on as clients. Like for me, that is one very clear boundary where I will say, you know what, that's not my area. I don't do that. And for me, I don't say that it's not in my value system, but I know personally that's just not something I'm comfortable with. And I do value, whatever children want to play with, they play with it. Right? Doesn't matter if it's stereotypically girls or boys' toys, I'll let children be them.
Yeah, so you don't see it as a problem that needs fixing,
No,
right? Yeah.
no, exactly. Is there anything for you, Dave, that you're comfortable sharing that can be a trigger in terms of what a topic a client may bring up that you may not agree with?
Well, I don't know if I have specific examples that I really want to share, but
Sure.
I have philosophies or I have principles that guide me. And, part of the code of ethics, right? Treating people with dignity and respect. So that front and foremost, right? I don't have to agree with their political views. I don't have to agree with
Yes.
their, like, so that, yeah, I can still treat them with dignity and respect. And then, I always think connect before correct. So, how
Mm,
strong's the connection if we are going to go into the territory where I say something like, you know what, that's not my view on that, right? And sometimes it's kind of agree to disagree, right? And there's certain clients that know there's certain areas that we don't agree on, right? When it
hmm
comes to say like maybe sexual orientation or views on even just Pride Month that happened, right? And
hmm
there'll be comments, and I have rainbow, things in my office to
Yeah.
indicate to people that my views. I'm quite open with whatever sexual orientation you have, and I don't think that's something that needs fixing or changing. I actually think it needs acceptance and welcoming, and so like I can still work with a client if we have
Yeah.
different views on that, but the client might fire me, right? That might be, I might just be clear about my biases and the person says like, I don't really, usually they don't say anything. They just don't come back, right? So
Yeah. Well, I think this is where the power of connection comes in because as you talked about having, the pride flags in your office, I also have an equity statement on a plaque in the office where when people are waiting, it's like it's right there for them to read. You can't miss it. And even though at times clients, whether it's a teenager or an adult, may make a certain statement that may go against that equity statement, I think in a way, the way I see it is that they feel comfortable enough in my office to still say something that is important to them, right? So who is it for me to judge? And to your point earlier, I still see the goodness in them, and I still see that they are here to work, work on their goals in therapy. So if they make a one-off comment about something that I may not agree with, right? Whether it's gender differences or sexual orientation or culture, can I look past that as sort of a one-off, but we're still working on the goals and they're still putting in effort to make adjustments and improvements in their lives.
yeah, and it might be a one-off, but it might also be, I look for the deeper meanings, the deeper, what are the fears, what are the emotions, and I always think like you can validate any emotion, not any behavior, right?
Hmm.
So there's a difference. But if someone is making, say, a comment about immigration, right? And I go, ooh, like that is treading into some territory that, I have different beliefs about immigration in Canada. And but if it, they're afraid to lose their job, right? And they're following some things that are saying
Right.
that you're you're going to be replaced by new labor that's coming in at for lower wages. And I'm like, oh, I can relate to that fear. Let's talk about your fear of losing your job.
Yep. Yep. I think that's where it'll be clinically important and conceptually important. I think in terms of my experiences with certain statements like that, it hasn't been frequent, but if it does happen, again, if it's something that's a bit of an anomaly from what, how sessions have gone in the past, I will treat it as a one-off. However, if it comes up again, right, it's like, okay, something's there. Something is bugging you about this,
Hmm.
right? So let's process it, let's put it out on the table and let's talk about it, right? Because now it's a repeated statement or idea or something that you've said over and over again now.
Yeah. And, we said at the beginning about not having a lot of training in this area or not a lot of focus on it. There is some focus on learning about your own biases and your own values and your own beliefs and being clear about that,
Hmm.
before you start meeting with other people and
Yep.
bumping up against different views
Yep.
that you're going to be triggered by or upset by. So that is important, like understanding that ahead of time. And so you can kind of not be surprised by your reaction, but you might still get caught off guard every once in a while, right? Where it's
Yep.
yeah, a new client or a client that you've seen before that are now they're now sharing something. And then I don't know, my view or my approach is to be quite transparent. And if I'm aware of my values and my beliefs, well, then I can share those with the client and say, this is where we might differ. How are you
Yep.
with working with me? Like,
And also the other way around too is, knowing what clients to take, and this is why we have a very thorough intake process, because if a potential client is already, talking about things that may make a certain clinician at the office uncomfortable, it's better not to start than to get started. And then, like you said, you're sort of hitting a brick wall.
yeah, that brings up a big topic, right? Around intakes and pre-screening and finding the right fit or guessing kind of where this person might fit best with who in the office. And there's very different views on it. I know for myself, like even though I'm with a group practice, we all have our own autonomy to kind of practice our own way.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't give intake forms before I meet someone. So I'll have the first appointment and I have an intake form that I want them to fill out. But
Yeah.
my approach is, hey, this is meet and greet. Like, let's see if this could be a fit. And here's my intake form. Now that you've met me and you know who I am, like, this is some information that I'd like to know about you. Can you bring it back to the second appointment? And, very rarely, I think the information in that intake form then says, like, oh, I don't think we can work together.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe I'll add to that. Sometimes I will do a quick phone call just to kind of,
Yeah.
hey, I got your email and, what are you looking for? And here's what I can offer and see just if it's a good fit right from there.
I think we can probably do another episode on how private practice is run. But yeah, no, I have an intake coordinator. She's actually has her master's in psychotherapy. And so it's actually really positive in terms of, what she looks out for.
Mm,
And she's been with the practice now for 3 years. And so she knows all the clinicians and what our tendencies are and what we're comfortable and uncomfortable with. And so sometimes she'll just be like, Andrew, I just got this referral, but I don't think you're going to want to take it. Right. So I do sift through the information. Like she'll spend probably sometimes even up to half an hour with a
yeah.
potential client just to do that intake to see what some of the things are and document it. And then we'll read through it and be like, yeah, you know what? Maybe not. Or sometimes I will say, you know what? Why don't I give this person a call just so that I can get a clearer idea? And then I make the decision there.
Well, yeah, I think we could just keep rolling with this, but if clients know that that is the process,
Yes.
sometimes, I mean, rightfully so, they want to get help and they don't want to be turned away, and so they might not share everything.
True.
And then
It happens.
once you start meeting, you find out. And sometimes, I remember having a client where it was like 12 sessions in, and I was like, geez, it just feels like something isn't quite right. And like, I'm not sure if I'm being helpful. I'm not sure if this is working. And it took 12 sessions before the client said, like, this is what I'm here to talk about.
Yep.
Right. And so, yeah, I mean, how open and honest are people in the intake from the
Yep.
beginning? And yeah.
And some people might have seen other therapists before, didn't have a great experience,
Hmm.
but they still want help, right? So again, I think it goes back to what I said before. Some people may test the limits, but what I've often found, if you can make a strong connection, or even just a positive connection, it doesn't have to be a strong connection. I've found that the edges will soften because there's a sort of an air of respect, right? Even if we don't know each other well, maybe we're only one or two or three sessions in, but there's an air of respect. And I'd like to think I carry myself professionally. So, it shows them that there's a process and there's a professionalism to therapy. It's not just us talking like we're going to be friends.
Yeah. And I think, again, the softening that you talk about, what comes to mind for me is even like men in men's group that come through the door for the first time. And, they might be making some comments that are off-putting, that are on the edge or cross the edge. But if we can validate that they're angry, right, that they're hurt, all
Yeah.
of a sudden that changes, right? And so some
Yep.
of those general statements about women are this or something is this, and it's like, oh, you're hurt. And we can connect with that. And then it gets more specific and less stereotyped and general.
So I think what you're alluding to, Dave, is that rapport, right? That sort of respect that I'm going to give you. Like you came to my office. And I always welcome people the first time they come in, right? Like, welcome, like you took time out of your day to get here, really appreciate it. And it's just showing them that I'm going to value you as a person and, say what you have to say and, I'll keep judgment out of it and let's see where this goes and just really create that strong positive rapport from the very start if we can.
Yeah, and like the goodness in people, the other
Hmm.
way that I think there's more right with people than wrong with people, right? So even when I'm meeting with this person for the first time, it's like, what's right with them, right? Even though they don't see it or they're not talking about it, I'm holding a bigger picture.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, most people, I haven't met a whole lot of people that really I thought were at the core bad people. I can't even like think of one, but the sociopathic or that 1% of the population that doesn't have a lot of empathy or concern for others.
Yeah.
But at least I don't work in the in the justice system, or I don't work
Hmm.
in some of the other areas where so a lot of people like that won't sign up for private therapy.
Yes, yes, yes. No, it's very true. I was going to add the context in which we work is very different. It would be very interesting to talk to someone who works in forensics,
Yeah.
right? A forensic psychologist who works within the justice system, who works within the prison system. And, as you talked about that 1%, there are individuals of that 1% in there, and they are, let's say, court ordered to receive psychology services. How do you work with those individuals who don't show empathy, who perhaps still believe that their crimes that they committed are justified? Right. It would be so interesting to talk to someone in forensics.
Yeah, or even worse, that they're gonna use therapy to get better at hurting other people, right? Like,
Right.
or if you're working with a couple and like there's a risk that someone actually is vulnerable and that gets used against them later on. So of course we have to be careful, but I like that 1%, like one out of 100 people, right? So I'm not gonna spend all my time creating all of these like safeguards for a very small part of the population.
Yeah. The odds are with us, Dave.
Yeah, so going back to being triggered,
Yeah.
taking that deep breath, finding ways to regulate myself,
Hmm.
and then using immediacy or using like self-disclosure, and especially if I had a facial reaction, right? And I tend to, some of my clients have said like, I have an expressive face. Like when they're talking, I have reactions to it, right? And I'm hoping that a lot of that is like validating that I'm showing my concern and interest, but something like what might look like disgust, right?
Yeah.
Or some kind of a negative reaction to someone disclosing something that they're already feeling ashamed of. That can be a rupture. That can be
Yeah.
harmful.
I think that's where I'm really mindful and actually as you're saying that, like, does it make us better therapists if we have stronger social skills? Right? This sort of being able to step into someone's shoes. Okay, if I make this facial expression right now in this moment, how's this other person going to react or feel? Right? So in the moment, that split second decision to say, okay, keep your facial expression neutral. That
Yeah.
that is like being able to display just really adequate social skills right in that moment.
Hmm.
Right? But does that then help us do what we do as psychologists?
Well, I think it depends on the type of therapy you're doing and the type of client that you're working with, right?
Yeah.
And there was a time where neutrality, right, was what you should strive for. You were supposed to be very neutral and not, but I think we're moving away from that because it's just not like that realistic,
Yes, yes.
right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And so, even people listening to this podcast that might be clients or future clients, right? They're gonna already know some of my biases and some of my, right, and some of my
Yeah.
values. That's part of being human. And depending on the way you work, you might work more in a cognitive way and less emotional, or you might work
Hmm.
more in a different approach that, yeah, it doesn't show up as much. But if you're working in an experiential approach, and if you're intentional about the relationship and how important the relationship can be, then I think your facial reactions matter and your awareness of your
Yeah.
facial reactions and your body posture and all of that matters.
Yeah. So again, though, I think it's like knowing when to use it, right? Knowing who you're with and knowing when to use it as a source of therapeutic process.
Yeah, or even just acknowledging it, right? Like, so the
Yes.
client noticed a shift, and then I'll say like, "Wow, I need a second here. What you just shared really hit home for me." Right? I don't need to tell them what it is about what they said, hit home for me, but I'll acknowledge that what you saw was real, right?
Yeah.
And even as a funny note, sometimes I'm sore from like playing soccer and I'm in a lot of physical, like sore muscle pain. So I'll go to move and my facial reaction is like one of like, pain, but you could interpret that in different ways. So I'll sometimes warn clients in advance. I'll say, I'm kind of experiencing some pain. So if I make a face, like it's likely because of that. So just a heads up. And then they can question me or they can, say, what was that about? How come you made that face when I said that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've used more humor when it comes to that. Like if I'm describing, let's say I am having some pain, I'll use a bit more humor. I do think though that's probably where our styles differ. Like when you mention like you'll disclose or you'll use it as part of the therapeutic process to say like that really hit home for me. With my style and my therapy approach, I probably wouldn't say something like that. I will continue to be very empathic towards the client
Hmm.
and perhaps use more of an emotion focused type of approach, right? How helping them validate their emotions, to process their emotions. But my therapeutic approach probably wouldn't go towards like saying, "Oh, that really hit home for me." But there's no right style. Like it's just our differing styles.
Well, yeah, and for different clients, different styles are going to work.
Yeah.
And so finding what works for you if you're a listener and even as a therapist, what you're comfortable with. Yeah, I think when you were talking, I was thinking I just recently had a session where, the client was grieving and I had tears in my eyes and we
Mm,
didn't really talk about it, but later on it came up that, often this client feels burdened by showing that emotion. And so I asked, like, did you see the tears in my eyes? Did you notice that I, had been feeling those feelings too?
mm,
And we processed that. We like it was a really, I think, pretty helpful experience, right? And so I don't want to distract or detract from the client's experience by putting the focus on me, but I also want to like acknowledge that this is a human experience, that this is, yeah.
So no, I think that can be really, really helpful too. But like you said, depending on your client and it's knowing who your client is,
Hmm.
that if you do share that, is it going to be helpful for them
Hmm.
or would that actually not do any good?
Well, yeah, my follow-up question was like, do you feel like you're burdening me? Right? Because if
Mm,
this is the theme in your life with all the other people, or is this different? And then we get to
mm,
kind of check that out. How come this is different, or how might this feel different? And then
yeah,
the client could say, yeah, I'm worried. I'm worried that you are going to be uh, like, this is going to ruin your day, or this is going to be upsetting for you. And then I can talk about like how I take care of myself and how I process difficult emotions. So
yeah,
again, without like, I don't want to be the focus of it, but I want to relieve the client that, like, hey, you're not hurting me by showing these negative feelings. Like, I'm welcoming your grief right now,
yeah.
even if it brings tears to my eyes.
So yeah, no, that sounds like a really good therapeutic approach in terms of working with certain clients who really emote as well as connect with people, right? And again, I think it's just knowing who that client is,
Mhm.
and whether or not as a therapist you're comfortable with that as well, right? I think it takes practice.
Well, there's definitely stuff that, I'm triggered, or I'm like
Yeah,
that the client's story relates to my story. And I'll note that for myself. I'll still take that same breath and then I'll, focus on what the client is going through or saying without sharing that. But I've
yeah,
noted it for myself that, like, this is something I need to look at in my own therapy or on my own time and spend some time kind of processing it, because I didn't know I'd have that, or I didn't know that
yeah.
was still there or bothered me like that.
So I think, there's so many different types of triggers that we can experience even in our own offices. And I think with this conversation, it's so interesting. Like, there's no specific course about how to deal with triggers and how to cope with triggers as a therapist. Often we have to work with it ourselves, receive our own therapy. It can be that, or it can be something seemingly as simple as taking a deep breath. And, for me, I mentioned that deep breath, but it's also like sometimes just, calling my wife and just hearing a familiar voice, right? A calming voice, or hearing my kids in the background. And
Hmm.
again, it just sort of brings me back to center.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I guess, late night and maybe oversharing, but there are times, like you said, where you lay on your couch or lay in your office for a while with no one around at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Like, there are times where I've cried at the end of the day. Like, I've really just felt like the tragedy of the world, like how bad things happen to good people and how
Yeah.
sad, you know, parts of what people are going through.
Hmm.
And I mean, it's part of life. Like, I
Yeah.
just, yeah. And I feel like if I can let that happen and accept that that's part of life, the bad part of life, and then I go home and it doesn't stay with me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That idea of compartmentalizing, I think for me, it's when clients have told me about trauma, certain traumas. And yeah, that will start to have me get tearful as well. But again, I think the tears can be helpful in terms of connecting with the other person, right? They see
Hmm.
that you're human as well, right? And they see that their story is important, that their story brings emotions to others. And that's, if you're sharing that emotion together, that's connection.
Hmm. Well, and there is some approaches that talk about, like, essentially being in a parental role or like a caregiver role for the
Hmm.
client. And so showing appropriate emotion, and sometimes that's not tears, sometimes that's anger, right?
Hmm.
Like there was
Yep.
injustice or there was
Yep.
something that wasn't right. And like, yeah, I can see you're
That
angry
happens
and I'm
too.
also angry,
Yep.
right? Like that
Yep.
wasn't right.
So even if a client shares that something really positive happened and you show them how happy you are for them, right? Again, it's like mirroring those emotions, but it's not like we're being fake about it. Like they're real. Like we're really happy for you, or oh my goodness, like we are angry for you, or wow, that I'm really sad with you,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
And if it is fake, people are going to pick up on that, right? Like you better be genuine. I hope that it's not like a therapeutic intervention that you're trying to cheer them up, but there are times where I'll say like I'm your cheerleader. Like
Yep,
I am hoping this works for you and I want to
yep,
celebrate it with you. And I think we'll maybe do another episode on this, but like sometimes people don't come to therapy when things are going well or
yes,
yeah, and I'm like, "Oh,
yep,
hold on." You
yep,
know, that those can be really good sessions because we can really spend some time acknowledging and celebrating and looking at all the hard work that you've put in to get here and
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, no, some clients will just want to come when things are not going well.
Mhm.
But we can save that for another episode. Well, it's getting later, Dave. I'll ask this question this time. Any takeaways for you at the end of our discussion here?
I just think I think about my own development as a psychologist, as a therapist, and I think, have compassion for yourself and you are human, any therapists that are starting out. And I think over time I've done, I think I'm doing and I've done some of my own work around the
Hmm.
things that are upsetting to me and that do trigger me. And that allows me to be more, like you said, kind of grounded and I kind of like I want to be not confident, but I want people to look at me and be like, okay, I think he can handle this. Like he can, and
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the more I've done my own work outside of the therapy room, that has allowed me to feel more comfortable and confident in ways that I don't think I would have, 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, though that's a really, really good takeaway. I agree. I think for me, it's just knowing who I am as a therapist, even as a person, as an individual, being able to know that I care for other people and I can bring that into a therapy session, into my clinic. And I do think part of that word is confidence, right? Having confidence to know that, if someone steps into my office, I can care for them, right? That I can see goodness in them. And I do have the ability, again, I hope it doesn't come off as boastful, but I do like to think that I have a strong ability to connect, right? And having the confidence to say, okay, 9 out of 10 people who walk into this room, I will be able to connect with them. I will find a way, right? Might be needle in the rough kind of search, but I will find a way to do it before the end of this appointment,
Even if you're triggered.
even if I'm triggered.
Yeah.
Right, but it's not necessarily showing that I'm triggered. Let's listen to the rest of the story. Let's listen to the 99% of the story, right? Rather than just hearing that 1% of the story.
Well, I had a lot of fun tonight.
Yeah,
Not that
no,
we want to get in the habit of doing this in the evenings, but yeah, hopefully the listeners get something out of this. And if you did, you could hit subscribe or follow or like or leave a comment, rating. It does help us kind of promote this and keep us going. Not that we are making any money off of this, but we, I think spread the word if this is helpful. And the reason we're doing this is to, have a bigger impact than just the work that we do at our office. So
hmm Yep. The farther reach that we can have, I think the more positive it can be. And we're not making any money off of this. In fact, I am currently losing sleep off of this. But it's been a lot of fun, and we'll talk to everybody again next time. In the meantime, take care.
Take care.